so we're in chapter 2 of Paddington Marches On, and this is called The Most Unusual Ceremony. All right, and I don't know if you can see Paddington here and what's in his hand. It's an envelope, it looks like, so we'll see, or a letter of some kind, so we'll see what this has to do with the most unusual ceremony. Ceremony, do you know what that word means? Let me give you a hint. A wedding would be a ceremony. A graduation would be a ceremony. All right? One morning, just as the Browns were sitting down to breakfast, a loud rat-tat-tat sent Mrs. Bird hurrying to the front door. "I didn't want to push these through the letter box, ma'am," said the postman, handing her 2 large snow-white envelopes, "in case anything should happen to them. One of them is addressed to your young bear." The Browns' postman had once gotten one of Aunt Lucy's postcards stuck in their front door, and Paddington had given him some hard stares through the letter box for several days afterwards. Remember, Paddington likes to do his hard stares when he's not happy with people. Thanking the man for his trouble, Mrs. Bird hurried back into the dining room, clutching the letters. Paddington nearly dropped the marmalade in his tea when he saw that one was addressed to him. He often received a postcard from Peru, and at least once a week a catalogue arrived bearing his name. But he had never got anything quite as impressive as this. "Here, let me see," said Mr. Brown, picking up the knife and coming to his rescue. "You don't want to get marmalade all over it." "Thank you very much, Mr. Brown," said Paddington gratefully. "Envelopes are a bit difficult with paws, you know." A gasp of surprise went up from the rest of the family as Mr. Brown cut open the envelope, withdrew a large gold-edged card, which he held up for everyone to see. "Whatever can it be?" exclaimed Mrs. Brown. "It looks most important." Mr. Brown adjusted his glasses. "Sir Huntley Martin requests the pleasure of Mr. Paddington Brown's company at 2 o'clock on Monday, the 20th of February. There will be a tour of the factory followed by an important ceremony with special tea." "Sir Huntley Martin," echoed Mrs. Bird. "Isn't he the nice man we met at the Porchester the day Paddington had trouble with his onions?" "That's right," said Judy. "He's the Marmalade King. He said at the time he wanted Paddington to pay him a visit, but that was ages ago." "How nice of him to remember," said Mrs. Brown, opening the other envelope. "Trust old Paddington to get himself invited to a marmalade factory," said Jonathan. So a marmalade factory would be a factory where they make a whole bunch of marmalade and put it in jars, and then they take it to the stores and sell it. Okay, so it's the factory where they make all those jars that you can buy in the store. So think of the marmalade we made last year, and we put them in little containers. Think if we had made enough to put them in jars that you could sell at the store, like if you were looking for a jam. "It's like taking coals to Newcastle. I wonder what the ceremony is." "Whatever it is," replied Mrs. Brown, holding up another card. "He must have known it's half term. He invited the rest of us to see late in the afternoon." Said Mrs. Bird, looking at Paddington. "It's less than a week away. I can see a certain person going to have a lot of cleaning to do." "Perhaps it's a sticky ceremony, Mrs. Bird," said Paddington hopefully. Mrs. Bird began clearing away the breakfast things. "Sticky as it may be," she said sternly, "but no bear goes visiting from this house in the state you are in at that moment, least of all going to a ceremony. You need a bath, and a going over with a vacuum cleaner." Paddington sighed. He always enjoyed going out, but he sometimes wished it didn't involve getting to be made such a fuss about. All the same, it was noticeable during the next few days that he paid several trips to the bathroom without once being asked, and as a result his fur became gradually shinier and silkier. By the time the following Monday arrived, even Mrs. Bird's eagle eyes could find no fault in his appearance. It had been arranged that as a special treat, Paddington should go on ahead of the others. He felt very excited when he climbed into the specially ordered taxi and settled himself in the back seat, together with his suitcase, the invitation card, several maps, and a large thermos of hot cocoa. It was the first time he had been quite so far afield on his own, and after waving goodbye to the others, he consulted his map and peered out the window with an interest as the taxi gathered speed on its way through London streets. On the map, the journey to the factory looked no distance at all, only a matter of inches. So when you look at a map and you look at from one city to another, it doesn't look that big. But in actuality, it takes a lot longer than what you think it would on the map. But Paddington soon found out it was much farther than he expected. Gradually, however, the tall gray buildings gave way to smaller houses and the familiar red buses grew less in number until at long last the driver turned the corner and brought the taxi to a halt in the side street near a group of large buildings. "Here we go, Gov," he said. "Can't get right up to the gates, I'm afraid. There's a bit of an obstruction, but it's only a few yards up the road. Can't miss it. Just follow your nose." The driver paused and looked down at it out of his cab with growing concern as Paddington, after stepping down onto the pavement, began twisting about for several seconds, then suddenly fell over and landed with a bump in the gutter. "Air!" he called anxiously. "Are you all right?" "I think so," gasped Paddington, feeling himself to make sure. "I'm only trying to follow my nose, but it keeps getting in my way." "Well, you has to point it in the right direction to start with," said the driver as he helped Paddington to his feet and began dusting him down. "You're in the right state and no mistake." Paddington examined himself sadly. His fur, which at the moment before had been clean and shiny as a new brush, was now covered in a thick layer of dust, and there were several rather nasty-looking patches of oil on his front as well. Worse still, although he still had tight hold of his suitcase with one paw, the other was completely empty. "I think I dropped my invitation card down the drain," he said bitterly. The driver climbed back into his cab. "It's not your day, mate," he said sympathetically. "If I were you, I'd go get where you were going as quick as possible before anything else happens to you." Paddington thanked the driver for his advice and then hurried off down the road in the direction of an imposing-looking building with a large illuminated jar on its side. As he drew near the entrance, he sniffed several times. There was a definite smell of marmalade in the air, not to mention one or two kinds of jam, and he quickened his step as he approached the small office to one side of the gates, where a man in uniform was standing. The man eyed Paddington up and down. "We're not taking any bears at the moment," he said. "I should try the ice cream factory next door." "I haven't come to be taken on," exclaimed Paddington hotly, giving the man a hard stare. "I've come to see Sir Huntley Martin." "Ha! Yeah," said the gatekeeper sarcastically. "And who are you, pray? Lord Muck himself?" "Lord Muck?" repeated Paddington. "I'm not a lord. I'm Paddington Bear." I am Paddington." "Hey, you've seen yourself in the mirror lately?" asked the gatekeeper. "Lord you may not be, but mucky you certainly are. I suppose you left your royals around the corner?" "My rolls?" said Paddington, looking most surprised. "I did not bring any rolls, only some cocoa. I thought I was going to eat here." Said the gatekeeper, taking a deep breath. "I don't want no cheek from the likes of you. There's an important ceremony taking place this afternoon. They're opening a new factory building, and I'm strict instructions to keep the gate clear. We don't want no young and unemployed bears hanging about loitering up the place. If you want a job," he continued, picking up the telephone inside his office, "I'll call the foreman. Thought what he'll think of it, I don't know. It says hands wanted on the board, not paws." Paddington looked more and more upset as he listened to the gatekeeper. "But I haven't come for a job," he exclaimed. "I've been invited by Mr. Huntley to the ceremony." "Huh, yeah," said the gatekeeper disbelievingly. "And I suppose you're going to tell me next you've lost your invitation card." That's right," said Paddington. "I had a bit of an accident when I got out of my taxi, and it fell down the drain." "Look," said the gatekeeper crossly. "Pull the other leg. It's got bells on. I met your sort before. After a free tea, no doubt. The only way you're going to get into the factory, my lad, is through the works entrance like everyone else." He turned as a figure came hurrying out of the main building. "Here's the foreman, and I'd advise you, watch your step. He doesn't stand for any kind of nonsense." "There's a young out-of-work bear here, Fred," called the foreman as he reached the gate. "I was wondering if you could fix him up. I told the job center we're a bit short-handed, said the foreman, looking at Paddington up and down, but I reckon they must be in worse state than we are. Do you know anything about marmalade? He said, not unkindly. Oh, yes, said Paddington. I eat a lot of it at home. Mrs. Bird is always grumbling about my jars. Well, I don't know what to suggest, said the foreman as Paddington returned his gaze very earnestly. Is there anything in particular you'd like to try your paw at? Paddington thought for a moment. I think I'd like to see the chunks department first, he announced. That sounds very interesting. Chunks department, said the foreman, glancing at the gatekeeper. I don't know that we've got what you might call a chunks department, but I could start you off in the barrel section if you like. There's no one working there today. It's where we keep the empty several orange barrels, he explained as he led the way across the factory square past several rows of seats and flower-decorated stand. They all have to be scrubbed out before they're sent back to Spain. I dare say you'll find plenty of old chunks left in them if you're interested. Paddington, who thought the foreman had said the key word several orange barrels, nearly fell over backwards with astonishment as the man led him into a yard at the side of the factory, and he took in the sight before him. There were big barrels, small barrels, barrels to the left, barrels to the right, barrels in front, and barrels which would seem to be piled almost as high as the eye could see. In fact, there were so many he soon became dizzy trying to count them. You don't have to scrub them all, said the foreman encouragingly. Only as many as you can. We pay 5 pence each for the big ones, 2 pence for the small ones. So more you clean, the more you earn. It's what we call piecework. 5 pence, repeated Paddington, hardly believing his ears. He only once scrubbed out Mr. Brown's water, but at Windsor Gardens. It had taken him most of the one weekend, but at least at the end of it, all Mr. Brown had given him was a 10 pence extra bun money. I think perhaps I'd like to try my paw in testing department instead, he said. The foreman gave him a look. You'll be lucky, he said. You have to work your way up to a job like that. Your best plan is to start at the bottom. He pointed toward the corner of the yard as he turned to go. There's a brush in the bucket over there, and you'll find a hose pipe in the corner. Only no playing about squirting people. There's a famous film star coming to make his footprint in the ceremonial cement today, and if I catch you wandering about, it'll be straight back to the job center. No mistake. Paddington stared after the foreman as he disappeared through the open gates. In the past, he had often found there were days when things seemed to go wrong for no reason at all, but he couldn't remember a day when things had gone quite so badly. In fact, they had not only gone badly, but they seemed to be getting steadily worse with every passing minute. He gave a deep sigh as he looked around the yard at the barrels, and then gradually a thoughtful expression came to his face. He felt sure that when the Browns arrived later in the afternoon, things would begin to sort themselves out. But in the meantime, he wasn't the sort of bear to let a good opportunity slip through his paws. Paddington believed in the making of most things, and it wasn't often he was allowed to play with a hose pipe, let alone be paid to do it, even if it was only 5 pence, a large barrel. A few moments later, the steady hiss of the escaping water began to mingle with the distant roar from the factory, and shortly after that the sound of rolling barrels added to the general noise as Paddington went about his task. Several times during the next hour, the foreman poked his head around the gate to see how things were going, and on the last occasion he brought the gatekeeper along. We've got a good lad here, he said approvingly. Makes a change from some of the layabouts we've been getting lately. The gatekeeper surveyed the small figure inside the yard. He said darkly. I can see something else that's going to need a good hose down before this day's out. He nodded toward the factory square where a large crowd had assembled in readiness for the ceremony. I only hope he doesn't show himself in front of that lot. Sir Huntley will be making his speech any moment now, and he won't want no young bears covered in wet chunks roaming about. The gatekeeper addressed his last remark in a loud voice towards the yard, but Paddington was much too busy to notice what was going on outside. Working in the marmalade factory was a lot more enjoyable than he had expected. Already most of the small 2-penny barrels had been cleaned and stacked neatly to one side, and he was feeling very pleased with himself as he sat on the suitcase and made a careful note of the number on the piece of label from the old jar. As the foreman and the gatekeeper hurried back across the square, Paddington took a long drink of cocoa from his thermos flask and then turned his attention to the huge mound of 5-penny barrel at the back of the yard. So what he was doing was these big barrels here were full of orange chunks. And so what he had to do is clean them out clean, and then they would send them back to Spain, and then in Spain they would put more oranges in and send it back to the factory. So his job was to clean them out, and he was doing a good job of it because he liked marmalade and he could get sticky and messy. So he really liked that job. All right, but can you imagine Paddington with a job where he does not get into trouble? So take a look at this. All right, and if you see here, there's a foot sticking out of the barrel. All right, and here's another picture on the other page. So think about what might be happening to Paddington and why is he inside the barrel and where is the barrel headed? All right, so we will finish this next Thursday at a live Zoom again, and we will finish that chapter during our Zoom and give you guys some time to chat and show me new things that you have from your house. All right, so we'll catch you next Thursday for the rest of our Paddington story.